Standing as the penultimate boss of Elden Ring is a surprisingly enigmatic figure, given how much influence he has had over the lands between, and how much he himself has gotten around the continent. His story is a vital one to understanding the world and especially to make sense of its in-game ending. Plus, unlike the other final boss, he is not an amorphous blob who has never actually interacted with other characters in the game. So in this video, I'm going to explore the lore and life of none other than the hero with a head of flaming red hair, Radagon of the Golden Order. Radagon is an immediately interesting figure. After all, we meet him at the very ending of the game to find him as the vessel of the Elden Ring, somehow housed in the same being as Queen Marika, the purported god of the land. We do have a chance to see that Radagon is Marika earlier in game, but exactly what that means, or at least implies, may be hard to tell. One thing we can say is that Radagon was likely not always part of Marika. He seems to once have been his own distinct person. We hear Melina speak about this in Marika's chambers, reciting words once said by Marika herself to Radagon.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, Leyndell Hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
This was said sometime before Marika and Radagon became one. So if Radagon began as his own person, who was he? Well, in familiar FromSoft fashion, we are not given a backstory in 4K, but we do have some clues to piece it together. The most obvious of which is Radagon's distinctive red hair. His hair is mentioned many times by item descriptions and NPC dialogue, and nearly all of his children inherited the hair color, with Miquella being the only seeming exception. Malenia, Rykard, Radahn, and even Ranni, judging from some bits on her original corpse, have his red hair. Rykard and Radahn's soldiers even sported red apparel, symbolizing their lord's pedigrees as Lord Radagon's sons. It's a prominent theme, and this is important because the only other havers of red hair in the game are the fire giants, enemies of the Order that were all but wiped out. The connection is made clear in the giant's red braid, which states that every giant is red of hair, and Radagon is said to have despised his own red locks. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind. This text is slightly ambiguous. The language about the curse, even in the original Japanese, does not make it clear what exactly is being referred to. Whether the curse is one on the giants, or the giants are cursing Radagon, or Radagon is being affected by a curse laid to the giants. We can't say for certain past a connection being made, but it seems that the most likely reading to me is that Radagon himself was a giant, or at least part giant. Yes, he is not as tall as the final fire giant, but the trolls are giants too, so we know they can range in size. And we can see further confirmation of this from the Sword of Milos, which reads, a sinister greatsword fashioned from a giant's backbone. The spines along each side of the blade have been tapered to a fine point, and mete out wounds like a lopsided saw blade. Milos was undersized for a giant, and was viewed as sullied and terribly grotesque. So, if Radagon was a small giant, he was perhaps ostracized and considered grotesque by the rest of his kind. These descriptions, plus Radagon's son Radahn being so massive in stature, plus Radagon having stony skin somewhat like that of the fire giant, and maybe Radahn and Rykard having similar eyes to the fire giant, all makes me lean towards Radagon being a giant, or part giant. There seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to this. In any case, this relation with the giants, to whatever degree, paints an interesting picture for Radagon, considering that the giants were enemies of the Order, Marika waged war on them, but Radagon is an extreme adherent of the Order. Marika called him Leyndell Hound of the Golden Order, Leyndell meaning dedicated or true, Hound clearly stating devotion and subservience. We can see why Radagon, as a devout Order follower, would despise his connection with the giants. Maybe he was originally prompted to the Golden Order by the other giants ostracizing him. With some understanding of his origins, we can now move on to the rest of his story. Pope Turtle Miriel gives a good outline.
Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host, when he met Lady Rennala in battle.
We can read from the sword's monuments about these battles. Radagon came at the head of an army of the Erdtree and Order. During the First Liurnian War, Radagon's glory burned red as his hair. And we learn from the Barrier of Gold incantation that this was when the red-haired Radagon joined the hero's ranks. But the warring was not successful. We read that during the Second Liurnian War, no victory for the Golden nor for the Moon, no prize but atonement, the birth of a vow. Muriel explains the stalemate and its resolve.
Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Rennala. The order of the Erdtree and the fate of the moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven.
Despite the strength of the Golden Order and the greatness of Radagon's glory, Liurnia could not be subdued through war, so it was instead brought into the fold through marriage. Radagon married the Lunar Queen Rennala, and began a life in the West. For this new life, he brought a golden sewing needle and golden tailoring tools, which were just some of the tools Radagon brought when he married Rennala and joined the Carian line. Maybe Radagon wanted to impress his new wife with some wicked tailoring skills, which apparently go to waste on his own clothing style of being forever shirtless. The further lore implications of Radagon being a seamster are unknown at this time, but these tools do have some relevance to the story. After all, we see that Radagon had Carian magic preceptors don masks with mouths sewn shut with gold thread, to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private. The gold thread was likely from his tailoring kit, and a keen eye will note the pattern of the thread, a crisscross grid that we will later see to be the symbol of Radagon and the shape of his rune, part of the Elden Ring itself. I had found this item description, but didn't notice that the gold thread was in its shape until Vati's video, and he credited Quelaag with the discovery, so quite the chain of lore telephone now that I'm telling all of you about it. But before we get to the rune, we have a bit more backstory, including the fact that Radagon's sewing tools were not the only wedding gift or tool. In the Snowy Norths, you may come across a misbegotten crusader bearing the Golden Order greatsword, a weapon of light that King Consort Radagon forged to proudly symbolize the tenets of the Golden Order. From the title of King Consort, we know that this sword was forged after Radagon's marriage with Rennala, but the rest of the description reveals a secret. It says, telltale signs betray that this was once the great sword bequeathed to Radagon by his first wife, Rennala. This sword was originally Rennala's wedding gift to Radagon, as part of a Carian tradition. We learn about this tradition from the Darkmoon Greatsword, which we find at the end of Ranni's questline. It reads, a moon greatsword bestowed by a Carian queen upon her spouse to honor long-standing tradition. Just as by becoming Ranni's consort, we receive the Darkmoon Greatsword, Radagon received the original form of the Golden Order Greatsword from his marriage with Rennala, and then he reforged it to be all about the Golden Order. We can see that Radagon did not want to dwell on his ex, very unlike his ex. So Radagon and Rennala got married and there was peace in the West. They had 3 children, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni, who, as I said, inherited their father's locks. But unlike the possibly shameful connection to the giants the hair had for Radagon, to his children the red hair had heroic implications. We see that Radahn inherited the furious, flaming red hair of his father Radagon, and was fond of its heroic implications, saying, I was born a champion's cub. Now I am the lord of the battlefield's lion. Radagon's heroics and feats as a champion gave the red hair a connotation of might and pride. During this time, Radagon also studied sorcery, a fitting practice for the husband of Rennala of Caria, and fitting too since he probably did not have much sorcery experience during his time in the Golden Order, what with him being focused more on incantations. We don't receive much more information about Radagon's time in Liurnia, for he would soon abandon Rennala and return to Leyndell and the head of the Golden Order. Muriel once again gives us the 411.
When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Rennala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and King Consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord. The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Rennala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
When Rennala lost her husband Radagon, her heart went along with him. Radagon left Liurnia and Rennala became a husk of her former self. This is likely why she seems so hollow when we find her after her boss fight. She could not even truly fight us. Ranni had to cast a spell which included a past version of Rennala to fight in her place. But Radagon did leave Rennala with a gift, the amber egg that she clutches, and within it resides the great rune of the Unborn. a final memento that Rennala clutches onto with the last of her being. The last aspect of Radagon in her life. Well, that and the dog. Then Radagon went to Queen America, and became the second Elden Lord, in a mysterious move that Miriel doesn't understand. Fortunately for us, we do not have 4 broken legs, and we can leave the Church of Vows to go find out. The secret that explains this monumental happening is found by following the clues of something else Miriel said about Radagon.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harbored a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbors his secret too.
We can find this statue in Leyndell, and then perform the law of regression incantation in front of it to solve 2 mysteries at once. The statue transforms into America and gives a message. Radagon is America. We already mentioned this before, but in gameplay this is the moment when it is revealed, that King Consort Radagon and God Queen America are one and the same. We know from earlier that Radagon and America were not always the same, so this provides the answer to Miriel's confusion. Radagon left Rennala and was able to become the second Elden Lord, despite being a mere champion, because he was chosen to become one and fuse with America. We will see more evidence later, but I think Radagon was chosen by the Golden Order, or the Greater Will itself, to fuse with America as a kind of insurance policy. Radagon was a Golden Order fanatic, and America seems to have been turning away from the Order. Radagon could have been brought in to keep America in line, which we will see happen later. When Radagon joined America, his children with Rennala became demigod stepchildren. After the union, he also went on to have 2 more children through some odd practice of self-cess with himself/his other self, America. Out of this peculiar arrangement came Miquella and Malenia. Malenia inherited her father's red hair, and Miquella his mother's golden hair. I had said Radagon practiced sorceries in Liurnia. After the move, he practiced incantations upon becoming America's husband. His icon notes that through this dual practice did the hero aspire to be complete. This phrasing plays into the theme of Radagon as incomplete or as just part of a whole, which we see on display given his relationship to America. Radagon was also able to blend this incantation practice into some solid father-son time, in what is one of the only known examples in the whole game of a father actually doing stuff with their kid. Radagon seems to have taught Miquella about incantations, since we know that Miquella, being the fearsome Empyrean prodigy that he is, developed at least 2 incantations, the Discus of Light and the Triple Rings of Light, as gifts to his father. And in seeming response, Radagon created Radagon's Rings of Light. Hopefully he had a less egotistical nickname for it, as a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella. Of note is the fact that all of these incantations are Golden Order fundamentalisms, which once again highlights Radagon's love for the Golden Order. Plus, this last incantation is found in the Golden Order Principia, which also contains the Law of Regression, one of the 2 key fundamentals of the Golden Order and what we use to reveal the Radagon statue. Yet this Golden Order fanaticism did not rub off on Miquella. The rest of the description of Radagon's Rings of Light tells the tale. It reads, "And yet the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold. Miquella would go on to create an unalloyed gold needle, to ward away the meddling of outer gods, and attempt to cure his sister of her rot curse. The Golden Order and the Greater Will could not or chose not to save his sister, so Miquella abandoned them and all other outer gods, attempting to do it himself. And his use of a gold needle makes me think of Radagon's gold sewing needle and his other tailoring tools. Perhaps Miquella found these tools and used them as the basis for his needle. It would be an ironic twist of fate for the fanatic's son to use his own tools as the means of walking down a completely opposite path. And I believe that covers the history of Radagon, every chiefly notable event that we know about him before the events of the game. If I missed something, let me know in the comments. In-game, we find Radagon trapped in the Erdtree, or maybe we should say America is the one trapped, since it seems to be Radagon's rune on the outside of the Erdtree, with the thorns not letting us pass, the same symbol that we saw on the mouths of the Carrion Preceptors. We find confirmation of this rune as Radagon's in his Scar Seal, which bears the same rune and reads, "An eye engraved with an Elden rune, said to be the seal of King Consort Radagon. These seals represent the lifelong duty of those chosen by the gods." There's also his sword seal, which features the rune sinking into the eye even deeper. It adds another layer of description, saying, "Solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden," not unlike a gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. A gnawing curse is an apt description for how the rune seems to be sinking into the eye. These seals seem to be describing how Radagon was chosen for a certain duty, and chosen in such a way that he likely had no choice in the matter, like a gnawing curse. Fittingly, America has a similar set of seals which say the same. If Radagon and America are being forced to act by the greater will, it makes sense why America would try to break free, and it serves as a testament to his faith that Radagon would still follow the Order's path, viewing his assigned duty as righteous, despite his own lack of say in the matter. So, Radagon sealed the Erdtree sometime after the Shattering, which, I should point out, he also tried to stop. America's hammer tells us how the night went down. A stone hammer made in the lands of the Numen, outside the lands between. The tool with which Queen America shattered the Elden Ring, and Radagon attempted to repair it. The hammer partially broke upon shattering the ring, becoming splintered with rune fragments. Radagon tried to repair the Elden Ring, but he could not. So he sealed off the Erdtree and trapped himself and America inside, along with crucifying America and sticking a spear in her side to really fit the Christ-like symbolism. Once we burn the Erdtree and unseal Destined Death, the entry to the Fractured Stone is opened. We can step in and finally see the red-haired hero in his stony, broken flesh. Inside his shattered body, we see the Elden Ring, including his rune of crisscrossed gold. Radagon fights with the zeal of a Golden Order fanatic, filled with a variety of golden incantations and hammer strikes sporting his distinctive weapon art, Goldbreaker, which is called the heroic Radagon's signature attack. He even features attacks with his own rune, and one that seems to make the outline of the Elden Ring on the ground. Upon his defeat, Radagon falls and his body becomes the weapon of the Elden Beast, whose sacred relic sword reads, "A sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal." Thoughts on what the weapon portends are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of a great sin, or a sign of great devastation. Some think of it as the end of an age, while others, the beginning. Radagon seemed to always be a tool for the greater will to enact its designs in the lands between. Perhaps it took advantage of the hatred he had for his giant affiliation to push him down its path. Or perhaps things were the other way around, and Radagon disliked his giant side simply because he was a Golden Order fundamentalist. Either way, it made him a perfect candidate and vessel for the Elden Ring, at least as it was under the influence of the greater will. Looking at him in this way, Radagon's end of becoming a tool of the greater will in another way, this time as a sword for its beast, is thematically fitting. In life and in death, Radagon is a tool of this outer god, being sent on each and every mission it had for him. He seems to have been able to find some loved ones along the way, but his life's overriding purpose was always that as an arm of the Order, a purpose that stretched even beyond his final breaths. He becomes the sword that is the Elden Beast's weapon in the last fight of Elden Ring. However, the Elden Beast boss fight is utter trash, and that unfortunately makes me feel sad to have a grand character and final boss fight like Radagon being co-opted by the lesser amorphous blob run around for 10 minutes boss fight. I don't have any more of a thematic way to end this video, so I will conclude by saying that Radagon is cool, even with his religious zealotry, and that I'm not actually done with the video. I have a couple more points about Radagon that I couldn't fit into the script naturally, so I'm just going to bring them up now. First is a note about something we can find in Farum Azula, what looks like a design of an old Elden Ring, maybe what it looked like during the Age of the Dragons. Of note is the lack of Radagon's rune. However, the tree roots overlapping the ring look like they could be an old version of the rune, with similar but more natural crisscrossing. Maybe Radagon's rune came into being when he fused with America, and the Elden Ring took on a new design. Another thing is that the sealed gates in Raya Lucaria seem to have a design similar to Radagon's rune. That's about all I have on that one, they just look similar. And lastly is a note about viewing Radagon and America as the Revis. Others like Zeostorm and people on the Elden Ring subreddit have identified quite a number of alchemical references in Elden Ring's world. Chief among them is the Revis, the end product of alchemy, its magnum opus or great work. The Revis comes from the Latin res bina, which means dual or double matter. It is a fusing of opposite halves into one being, notably a male half corresponding to the sun and a female half corresponding to the moon. It has heavy association with another concept called the Red King and White Queen, which I believe is another way of saying the Philosopher's Stone, though I could be wrong on that. From hair color to hermaphroditic fusing, there are a lot of parallels to Elden Ring and Radagon and America. This could be important to understanding Radagon, but it could also be FromSoft referencing some real-world symbolism without putting much explicit detail about it in the characters, which is kind of what the Christ-like connections seem to be to me. America being in a crucifixion position, especially with a spear in her side, and Hoarah being in the same position in the opening. I think there's an element of meaning here, like them being sacrificial and to some degree filling a Christ-like role in the game, but it's also not something that, at least in those two examples, I would take too far. I wouldn't think the spear in America's side has some specific strong meaning, but maybe there is something deeper into both of those and there's in-game evidence to justify such a deeper reading of it. All of this kind of reasoning does seem like a cool path of exploration, and as a lore head of Elden Ring and Dark Souls, I'm not one to really curtail somebody exploring really deep and at times stupidly niche levels of investigation, but this video is already long enough, so I'll keep things more centered on the game's explicit references to Radagon and his life story. Alright, my audio recording is looking at over 40 minutes, so without much more to conclude, I hope you have enjoyed watching. Subscribe for more Elden Ring lore, and comment your thoughts about Radagon and his story. You can also comment any other lore you are looking forward to me covering. I'll be making a good amount of it. I'll be making more of these videos, so be sure to stick around. This has been Mad Luigi. Thanks for watching. Bye.